Thank you all for joining us today. And I know there was some question about, as we go forward and share some information today, I know there was some question about when we would deliver some remarks and comments. I think that's important to our community, right? But we wanted to make sure that we took some time and gathered some information. We had some good information to deliver and clear some things up. So my name is Steve Drew. I'm the Chief of Police here in Newport News, and I will tell you, this is an unprecedented situation that we're dealing with. A 6-year-old. It is unprecedented. So there are some nuances here. Last Friday was a hard day for our city, for all of us. And there were a lot of heroes. I'll tell you that Saturday afternoon I was able to meet with family, and I was humbled, but I was able to meet with Abigail Zwerner. Abigail is a 25-year-old teacher, and she is a trooper. She is a hero. I talked with her, so before I talk today, I'm going to go through the timeline, establish that a little bit for you, talk about our officer response, what happened while we were there, and where we're at in our investigation. But please remember that we are only 3 days into this, that there's a lot of things that still need to happen, and I'll talk about that as we go forward. But there are some questions that we will not be able to answer because of where we're at with this investigation. When I met with Abigail's family on Saturday, and they took me up to her room, she asked me, first question, do you know how my students are? She was worried about them. And then today, when I went back to share with her that we were going to hold this press conference today, she again asked me, do you know how my students are? And that touched me, her family and her mother. Abigail wanted me to tell you all, but primarily her students and her parents of her students, that she is in stable condition, and that she is thankful for the thoughts and prayers that have gone out to her, the people that have reached out, not only here locally, across our state and across our nation. She is very, very appreciative of the support that she's getting and continues to get. So I just want to establish with you a brief timeline. Last Friday at Rich Neck Elementary School on January the 6th, at 1:59 a call came in and advised that a teacher had been shot, and there was no other information that came forward. Officers were dispatched at 2:00 p.m. Personnel to Rich Neck Elementary. And anytime we have a situation where there is a shooter or the believed a possible active shooter, officers are going to come from all over. So there were officers from different areas there. At 2:04, 2 sheriff deputies arrived at the school and entered the classroom where the shooting took place. And we'll talk a little bit shortly here. There was not an active shooter going on throughout the school. Everything happened in one classroom. 2 sheriff deputies entered at 2:04, and about 8 to 10 seconds behind them, 2 officers entered. When they entered the room, they found a 6-year-old child that was being physically restrained by a school employee. The child became a little combative, actually struck the school employee that was restraining him, and officers then took control of him and escorted him out of the building, placed him in a police car with an officer inside and outside that vehicle. Once that had occurred, there was a systematic evacuation of rooms and hallways for safety. So we still weren't sure exactly what all we had at that point. On the timeline, I want to go back and talk about the other response. As we said, at 2:04, deputies and officers responded. At 2:06, medics arrived at the school. At 2:07, the medics were cleared by officers to enter the building, that room was safe where we had someone had been injured. At 2:09, they made contact with Abigail, and at 2:11, she was transported to a local hospital where she's currently undergoing treatment. And again, if I didn't state earlier, she is still listed in stable condition, and I had a good conversation with her today. We talked a little bit about when the officers arrived. The young man was taken into custody and escorted out of the building. And officers responded then and began to put a plan together quickly to evacuate the hallways, the classrooms in a systematic order. But remember, we're dealing with elementary kids, right? And I will tell you, I was touched by the way that those officers interacted with those kids as they moved them from the hallway to the gymnasium. The faculty and staff there, and I'm not just talking about teachers. It was heroic, the way I saw them take care of those young people. Officers and faculty members took the students into the gymnasium. That's where they would stay until they were reunited with their family. The individuals that were in the classroom were taken to the library where they were held there, kept there with detectives, a couple of teachers, and eventually some school counselors. When they arrived, we escorted them safely to that area as we continued to clear the building so that they could be, the professionals could be with our young people, with students. We talked about detectives and counselors that were escorted there to make sure that we had professionals with the individuals that had been in that room. Once the building was safe, forensics entered the classroom and processed the crime scene. I want to share with you what we recovered there. One spent shell casing, a backpack, a cell phone, and a 9mm Taurus firearm was recovered. The firearm was recovered close to the student's desk where the shooting occurred. Mrs. Zwerner was providing class instruction. The 6-year-old child displayed a firearm, pointed it at her, and fired one round. There was no physical struggle or fight. She was providing instruction to her class. There was one round fired. Abigail took a defensive position, and what I'm sharing with you is because she has allowed me to share it. She took a defensive position where she raised her hand. The round went through her hand, exited the rear of her hand, and into her upper chest. And that's as far as I'm going to go with that. I'm not a physician, and the complications there, but that was the injury as she leaned back and took that round. She suffered a gunshot wound, but she was still able to get all of her students out of that classroom. From the video surveillance we have of the hallway, you can see the students running out of that classroom across the hall into, and I'm estimating about 17 to 20 students out of that classroom across all into other classrooms. Mrs. Zwerner was the last person to leave that class. She made a right turn and started down the hallway, and then she stopped. And she turned around. She turned around to make sure that every one of those students was safe. She made her way down to the administration office. We would later find out that she was given first aid as dispatchers talked to individuals who had made phone calls, and they took care of her through communications until the paramedics got with her. Several faculty members were interviewed at the scene. Others, there will be follow-up interviews. There will be follow-up interviews with Abigail. The students that were there, we will work with child psychologists who are trained to interview children. We'll work with them. We want to talk about what they saw in their accounts. Now, once I arrived, myself and other officers, I got a quick brief assessment of the situation, what we had, and I wanted to get out as quick as we could to our community and our parents, right, that we did not have an active situation, the individual was in custody, and that there was no longer threat. I tried to explain a little bit about how children were being moved to the gymnasium. We'll work with our school board members and faculty and staff there, our sheriff deputies, that came all together, and we had a systematic process of releasing a child to their parent. They were identified, and we got them back together. You can imagine there was some frustration by parents wanting their children back, and I can understand that. Myself and the mayor worked the line, those parents lined up, calming them down, reassuring that their students were okay. But you saw tears and frustration, anxiety, and I appreciate that, sir. Because in those situations, what we have to do is try to keep people calm because they're just unsure of what they had. And as we reunited, as I saw school employees walking students and officers walking students back to their families, I saw tears and smiles on both sides. Almost in that moment of seeing our fire department, sheriff's department, police officers, school board members, school officials working together to reunite those children and loved ones, and the care that they took for those young people, it was amazing. Laughing, supporting, holding their hands, talking to them. I saw children in the gym that were making fun of officers and officers making fun of them, just bonding and trying to make that situation that we're dealing with the best that we could. They remembered how important those young people are. In that time they may never forget. The parents of the 6-year-old child were contacted by the police department and asked them to meet us back at police headquarters. They did so, and at that point is where we interviewed the child and his mother. We determined that the firearm was in the residence where they lived, and the child had obtained that firearm, placed it in his backpack, and brought it to school. He was brought to school that day by his mother later that morning. The 6-year-old child brought to school, like we said there, and it was determined we wanted to know about that firearm. It's one of the things that we did in our press conference. There was one of the questions I had: where did that firearm come from? The firearm was legally purchased by the child's mother out of York County. Detectives. So after we had this information, like I said, this is unprecedented. We're dealing with a 6-year-old. Detectives talked with Human Services and Child Protective Services, our Commonwealth Attorney's Office. I've talked to Mr. Gwynn several times, as late as last night and this afternoon. The Community Service Board, which addresses mental and behavioral health. Due to the age of the child, we made these contacts and conversations to seek guidance on possible services, because none of us have a lot of information dealing with something like this. Based on this conversation, an emergency custody order was initiated by detectives, and the 6-year-old child was transported to a local hospital where he was evaluated. The CSB, Community Service Board, determined that a temporary detention order would be obtained from a magistrate, and the child is currently receiving treatment at a medical facility. Now, the department will continue to conduct this investigation, which will consist of follow-up interviews. We want to talk to the individuals that were in that classroom with help of a child psychologist. We want to meet with Human Services or Child Protective Services to see if there's any interaction or any cases that they have with the family or the child. And we also want to work with Dr. Parker and his staff, which have been extremely forthcoming with information of any issues they may have dealing with the child's behavior or any behavioral issues or concerns. I'd like to reiterate, and I said that night, I just want to reiterate that this shooting was not accidental. It was intentional. Now, I believe, and I told her today, I believe that Miss Zwerner, Abigail, that she saved lives on Friday. I cannot be more impressed with the faculty and staff of the school. I can't be more impressed with those children. The way they exited the hallways and went with instruction, the officers and deputies who talked to them, some holding their hands as they walked through, and the number of school employees that came in and we escorted to the gymnasium and even to the library to work with those young children. And I also want to thank all of our federal partners, state and local officials who called and asked if there's any support that you need from the governor's office, all over the state, but primarily around our surrounding jurisdictions. Is there anything you need? And I believe that's because of the relationship that we have. So as we go forward, those are the conversations we'll be having as we continue to put this investigation together. There are a lot of things that we need to continue to do. We're only 3 days into this investigation. But I just want to share with you a little bit about our response, what we had, a little bit of the timeline, what was recovered, and what we have done at this point, and where we are as we go forward to have those conversations with our Commonwealth Attorney and the CSB board on the best avenue to go forward in this situation. I'll take some questions at the end. At the end, I want to make sure that Dr. Parker and our mayor speak, but before I step away, I just want to say that I am appreciative and thankful for the partnership and the relationship we have, and I want to thank you for being there and just kind of all of us working together. I think that's what makes this city great.